The harbor at Crestwick, Maine looked different in November. The tourist boats were gone, the summer people had packed their pretty things and driven south, and what remained was the town's real skeleton: weathered docks, salt-crusted windows, and the kind of quiet that settled into your bones like cold water. Marcus Hale had been harbor master for 11 years, and he moved through Crestwick the way fog moved through it, present everywhere, touching nothing. He was 44 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested a man who had lived those years twice over. Broad through the shoulders, with hands that were built for hauling rope and pulling people from water, he carried himself with the careful stillness of someone who had learned that moving too fast broke things. His hair had gone gray at the temples sometime around the year he stopped noticing his own reflection. He wore the same dark jacket every day, not from poverty, but from indifference to anything that didn't serve a function. He was good at his job, precise, reliable, never late. The fishermen trusted him because he knew the tides better than anyone, knew when a storm was building before the radio said so, knew which boats needed watching and which captains needed talking down from bad decisions. They brought him coffee sometimes, left it outside the harbor office without knocking, because they had all learned that Marcus Hale did not particularly welcome interruption. Ray Kowalski, who had kept the Crestwick Lighthouse for 30 years, and was therefore the only person in town older and more stubborn than Marcus, was the exception. He arrived every Tuesday morning without invitation, sat in the one chair across from Marcus's desk, and talked whether Marcus responded or not. "You know what you are," Ray said one gray Tuesday in early November, wrapping both hands around his mug. "You're exactly like that lighthouse out there. Useful, necessary, everybody's grateful you exist." He paused, "and completely empty inside." "The lighthouse works fine," Marcus said, without looking up from the tide charts. "So do you. That's not the same as living." Ray set down his mug. "There's a new woman running the Callahan Bakery, Irish. Came over from County Clare 4 years ago with a little girl and not much else. Her husband died before they came. Heart attack, 38 years old." He waited. "Makes good bread." "I don't need bread." "Nobody needs bread the way you need bread," Ray said. "That's not the point." Marcus turned a page on the tide chart. Ray finished his coffee and left, same as every Tuesday. The harbor needed work before winter set in properly, dock lines to be checked, storm moorings to be set, the harbor master's skiff to be hauled and winterized. Marcus did all of it himself methodically, because methodical work required full attention and full attention left no room for anything else. That was the arrangement he had made with himself, years ago, and it had served him adequately. Adequately was enough. He had decided adequately was enough. He saw Nora Callahan for the first time not in her bakery, but in the Crestwick Savings branch on Harbor Street, on a Thursday afternoon when he had gone in to authorize the Harbor Association's winter account. She was standing at the manager's desk, and even from across the small lobby Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, the posture of a person working very hard to stay composed. Dennis Prout, the branch manager, was a trim man in his 50s who wore the same expression whether he was discussing weather or denying someone's livelihood. Not cruel, exactly. Just entirely sealed against the possibility that numbers on a page might represent a human being on the other side of them. "Mrs. Callahan," Prout was saying, in the patient tone of a man who considered patience a form of generosity, "the bank has extended considerable flexibility already. The loan is 90 days past its interest payment. I'm not in a position to authorize another extension without collateral you've already confirmed you don't have." "Mr. Prout," her voice was quiet, Irish in its edges, precise in the way of someone who had learned to choose words carefully in a language that was hers but not native. "The summer season was shorter than projected. Every business on this street will tell you the same. I am not asking you to forgive the debt. I am asking for 60 days. I have orders confirmed for the holiday season that will cover the full arrears and the next quarter's payment. Confirmed orders aren't guaranteed revenue. Neither is anything else in this life, she said. But I have a 9-year-old daughter, a working business, and no intention of failing. I am simply asking for 60 days. Prout looked down at his papers. I'm sorry, the bank's position is firm. Marcus watched her face receive that, the small tightening around her eyes, the breath she took through her nose, controlled and deliberate. She was perhaps 35, with dark hair pulled back simply, and a face that might have been called delicate if it weren't so obviously built for endurance. Her coat was clean but thin for November. She thanked Dennis Prout. She thanked him, turned, and walked out of the bank with her chin level and her eyes dry, and Marcus thought that was one of the more dignified things he had ever witnessed. He stood at the counter for another moment. Then he went and found Ray. "The bakery," he said. "How much are the interest arrears?" Ray looked at him for a long moment. "Why? How much?" Ray told him. Marcus wrote a check, made Ray promise to route it through the Harbor Fishermen's Community Assistance Fund, so it looked institutional rather than personal, and walked back to the harbor without discussing it further. He did not go into the bakery. He had done what needed doing. That was the end of it. Except that it wasn't, because nothing ever ended as cleanly as you planned. The storm came the second week of November, the kind that arrived from the northeast with genuine intention, knocking out power on the point for 18 hours, and taking a section of the Callahan Bakery's rear roof along with it. Marcus knew about the roof because he could see it from the harbor office window, blue sky visible through a gap in the shingles, the kind of damage that would let water in before the next rain and cold in continuously until fixed. He knew because he was observant. He was always observant. That was all. He went over at 4 in the morning when the street was empty, with materials from the harbor maintenance shed. It took him 2 hours. It was a practical matter. A waterlogged building in winter developed mold, and mold became a health code issue, and health code issues disrupted the street's commerce, which was adjacent to his professional concern. It was entirely logical. He was back at the harbor office before anyone was awake. At 7 that morning, Nora Callahan came out of her bakery's front door, looked up at the repaired section of roof, and stood very still for a moment. Then she went back inside. At 7:15, Fiona Callahan, 9 years old, dark-haired like her mother, wearing rubber boots that were slightly too large and a look of absolute purpose, walked directly to the harbor office, pushed the door open without knocking, and said, "My mum wants to know who fixed our roof." Marcus looked up from his charts. Storm damage gets reported to the Harbor Association. They coordinate repairs for the commercial district. Fiona tilted her head. "It was you, though." "The Harbor Association." "I saw your truck," she said. "At 4 in the morning because I woke up for water and looked out the window. It was your truck. It says Crestwick Harbor on the door." Marcus looked at her. She looked back. She had the particular composure of a child who had grown up around adult difficulty and learned to navigate it by being extremely direct. "Your mother should have the association review the repair for any warranty concerns," Marcus said. Fiona nodded slowly, in the manner of someone filing information for later use. "We're having soup and bread for dinner tonight. Mum says you should come. I have harbor logs to complete." "She said you'd say that." Fiona appeared entirely unsurprised. "She said to tell you that the bread is soda bread, which is Irish, and that it's very good, and that she doesn't like being in debt to people she hasn't properly thanked." She paused. "She didn't say that last part. I added that, but it's true." She turned and walked out, rubber boots clomping on the dock boards. Marcus looked at the harbor logs. He looked at them for a considerable time. He went to dinner. The bakery after hours was warm in a way Marcus had forgotten rooms could be. The ovens were cooling but still radiating, and the smell of the day's bread hung in the air like something solid you could lean against. A small table near the back was set for three, which he noticed and did not remark on. Nora Callahan was not what he had expected, although he could not have said what he had expected. She moved around her kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had made peace with hard work, not resigned to it but genuinely comfortable inside it. She asked him nothing personal for the first 20 minutes, talked about the storm, about the harbor, about the particular stubbornness of Maine winters compared to Clare winters, which she maintained were wetter but kinder. Fiona sat across from Marcus and watched him with frank, scientific interest. "Do you have children?" she asked, at the precise moment that her mother was not close enough to intercept the question. The word hit somewhere behind Marcus's sternum. "No," he said. Fiona accepted this with a nod. "Mum said you used to be a rescue diver. That's the people who go into the water when boats sink." "That's right. Why did you stop?" "Fiona," Nora's voice came from the stove, gentle but certain. "I'm asking a question." "You're asking several questions that aren't yours to ask." Fiona considered this. "I'll ask later then," she told Marcus confidentially. The soup was good. The bread was better. Marcus ate more than he had eaten at a single sitting in longer than he could accurately remember, and was unsettled by this and said nothing about it. After Fiona was sent to bed with a firmness that suggested this was a negotiation Nora won every night through sheer consistency, the kitchen went quiet. Nora refilled his coffee without asking and sat across from him, and the question she asked was not what he expected. "What broke you?" she said, not unkindly. The way a person asks when they genuinely want to know and have decided that circling around it wastes everyone's time. Marcus looked at his coffee cup. People don't usually ask that directly. "People usually have more to lose in the asking," she said. "I've already lost most of what I was afraid of losing. It makes you less careful." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the harbor water moved against the dock pilings in the dark. "I was a rescue diver for 14 years, he said finally. "Commercial and coastal. You go in when conditions are bad enough that no one else will. You train for it. You're supposed to be the thing that doesn't fail." He stopped. "My daughter was 7. She fell off a dock, 20 feet from where I was standing." He said the next part in the flat tone of someone who had rehearsed distance from the words. "The current took her before I got to her. I was a rescue diver for 14 years, and I could not get to her in time." Nora said nothing. She did not say she was sorry or that it wasn't his fault or any of the other things people said that landed nowhere near the actual wound. She simply stayed where she was, present and still, and let the silence hold what he had put into it. "Her name was Claire," he said, which he had not planned to say. Nora nodded. "Claire," she repeated, just the name, giving it the weight it deserved. Marcus stood after a moment, thanked her for the dinner with more formality than the situation warranted, and left before anything further could ask him to stay. At the door, Nora's hand rested briefly on his forearm, warm through his jacket sleeve. He felt it for 3 blocks back to the harbor. He told himself the dinner was a singular event, a courtesy returned for a roof repair that he officially had no involvement in. He told himself this with reasonable consistency for 2 weeks, during which he did not go back to the bakery, did not walk on that side of Harbor Street, and worked extra hours on harbor maintenance that did not strictly require extra hours. Ray arrived on Tuesday and said nothing about Nora Callahan for the entire visit, which was somehow worse than if he had. "You could just say it," Marcus told him. "I'm not saying anything." "You're not saying it very loudly." Ray drank his coffee. "Woman came by the lighthouse last week, brought bread, asked me, casual as anything, whether you were all right, said you seemed like someone carrying more than the recommended load." He set his mug down. "I told her you'd been carrying it so long you'd probably forgotten it wasn't supposed to be permanent." "You had no right to tell her that." "Probably not." Ray stood, picked up his jacket. She didn't look sorry to hear it, though. Looked like someone who recognized the weight. Marcus said nothing. Ray left. The harbor was very quiet that afternoon in the particular way of places where something is about to change. The blizzard arrived on a Tuesday night in December, 3 weeks after the dinner, with the kind of seriousness that closed roads and made the radio announcers' voices go careful. Marcus was at the harbor office at 11 p.m. running storm checks when the phone rang. Nora's voice, and he knew immediately from the first syllable that something was wrong. Not panic. She was not a woman who panicked, but the specific compression of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. "Fiona can't breathe," she said. "Her inhaler isn't working. I need to get her to the hospital and my car won't start in this cold. Marcus, He was already standing, already reaching for his keys. "I'm coming," he said, 3 minutes. He did not finish the sentence. There was nothing else to say. The roads between Crestwick and Ellsworth were what the blizzard had made them, white and unmarked and mean. Marcus drove the way he had once dived, with the focused calm that exists on the other side of fear, where there is only the task, and the task is everything. Fiona was wrapped in blankets in the back seat, Nora beside her, one hand on the girl's chest as if she could breathe for her by proximity. Fiona's breathing was audible from the front seat, labored and thin, the sound of a small body working too hard. Marcus did not look back. Looking back meant thinking about things other than the road, and the road required everything. "Talk to her," he said to Nora. "Keep her calm." "She is calm," Nora said, and her voice was steady, which cost her something Marcus could tell. "She's braver than both of us." "I know it hurts," Fiona said to no one in particular, in the thoughtful tone of a child making a philosophical observation. "But it's not as bad as last time." A pause. "Well, it might be as bad. I don't want to upset anyone." Marcus drove. 40 miles in a blizzard took 51 minutes. He stopped at the ER entrance, got out, opened the back door, and picked Fiona up, blankets and all, and carried her through the sliding doors at a walk that was nearly a run without quite being one, because running would have frightened her and she had already declared she was being brave. He told the intake nurse what he knew. Asthma, severe attack, inhaler failed, age 9, no known allergies. He knew this because Nora had told him these things in the car, in the efficient shorthand of a mother who had learned to brief people fast in emergencies. They took Fiona through the double doors. Nora went with her, turning once to look back at Marcus with an expression that had several things in it, none of which she had time to say. The doors closed. Marcus stood in the emergency waiting room. Fluorescent lights, plastic chairs, a television in the corner with the volume off. He sat down in a chair near the wall, elbows on his knees, and waited. He waited because there was nothing else for him to do. He was not her father. He was not family. He had driven through a blizzard and carried a child through sliding doors, and now he sat in a plastic chair because this was precisely the boundary of what he had any right to be. He sat there for 40 minutes. He did not get coffee. He did not look at his phone. He sat with his hands loose between his knees and thought about Fiona's voice in the back seat, calm and precise and determined not to frighten anyone, and thought about Nora's hand pressed to her daughter's chest, and thought about Claire, who had been 7, and who had been brave too, in the specific way of children who didn't yet know what the world could do. He was still sitting, exactly like that, when Nora came back through the doors. She saw him immediately. She crossed the room and stood in front of him, and he looked up, and she looked down, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "She's stable," Nora said. "They have her on a nebulizer. She's going to be fine." Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, the fracture that comes when the emergency is over and the body realizes how frightened it was. "She asked where you were." Something moved in Marcus's chest, large and unwieldy. He pressed his hands together to keep them steady. "I didn't want to presume," he said. "I'm not," he stopped. "I didn't think I had the right to be in there." Nora sat down next to him, not across from him, next to him close enough that their arms nearly touched. "Marcus," she said, quietly and with great precision, "you drove through a blizzard at midnight. You carried my daughter through those doors. You knew her allergies and her age and the name of her medication." She paused. "What exactly do you think the right to be somewhere looks like?" He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And then, for the first time in 6 years, something cracked open that had been sealed shut since the day he had stood on a dock in summer sunlight and lost everything he loved. It cracked open the way ice cracks in March, not all at once, but with a sound, and then spreading, and then there was no stopping it. He put his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. 6 years of cold, of harbor logs and tide charts and deliberate, careful, devastating loneliness came out of him in the harsh fluorescent light of an emergency waiting room while Nora Callahan put her arm around him and said nothing, because she understood, the way people who have held their own grief understand, that some things don't need words. They just need witness. "Her name was Claire," he said, which she already knew. "She was 7. I was supposed to be the man who saves people." He could barely get the words out. "I couldn't save her." "I know," Nora said. I stopped letting myself." He couldn't finish. "I know," she said again, and held on, and the winter stone finished melting. After a while, when he could breathe normally again, she said, soft and matter-of-fact, "You have been saving people this whole time. You just stopped letting yourself notice." She tightened her arm briefly. "Come meet my daughter properly. She has approximately 40 questions, and she's been very patient." Fiona came home 2 days later with a new inhaler protocol, a small stuffed seal that a nurse had given her, and the absolute conviction that Marcus Hale was now a permanent feature of her life, which she communicated by immediately showing him where they kept the extra blankets and informing him that the third step of the bakery stairs creaked, and he should know this. Marcus stayed. Not romantically, not immediately, not in any way that moved faster than it should. He came by in the mornings before the harbor opened, sometimes, and drank coffee at the back table while Nora prepped her dough. He fixed the third stair. He fixed the display case latch that had never closed properly. He fixed these things without being asked, and denied doing them with decreasing conviction, because Fiona always knew, and Fiona always told her mother, and Nora always looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between exasperation and something warmer than that. In January, Dennis Prout sent Nora a formal foreclosure notice. The holiday orders had covered the arrears, as she had promised. But a clerical processing delay had caused a technical default, and the bank's position, Prout explained in his letter, was firm. Marcus read the letter over Nora's shoulder. He set it down on the counter. He called 3 people. Ray, who knew every fisherman and shopkeeper on the coast and had opinions about all of them. Margaret Hess, who ran the Crestwick Business Association and had been trying to organize a harbor district preservation effort for 2 years. And a lawyer named Patrick Sears in Ellsworth, who handled small business cases and owed Marcus a considerable favor from a matter involving a boat, a storm, and an insurance claim that Marcus had documented with unusual thoroughness. What followed was not dramatic. It was paperwork, mostly. It was the business association formally contesting the foreclosure on procedural grounds. It was Patrick Sears identifying that the processing delay had originated on the bank's end, not Nora's. It was Margaret Hess writing a letter to the bank's regional office that was polite in tone and devastating in specificity. Dennis Prout, to his credit, accepted the outcome without argument. He was not a malicious man. He had simply never had anyone push back before. The foreclosure was withdrawn in February. Nora stood in the bakery when Marcus told her, flour on her hands and her apron, and looked at him for a long moment. "You didn't tell me you were doing any of that," she said. "You would have told me not to." "I would have," she agreed. "That's why I didn't tell you." She studied him. "Marcus Hale," she said, "you are the most aggressively helpful person I have ever met in my life." "I'm harbor master," he said. It's a service position." She laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and full, and it did something to the room that Marcus felt in his chest. He asked her to marry him on the harbor dock on a February morning so cold the air had edges. Not down on one knee, he was a practical man and the dock boards were icy. He just turned to her while they were standing looking at the water and said, "I want to stop leaving. I want to stay in the same place as you and Fiona. He stopped. Tried again. "I have been alone for 6 years and I was getting very good at it, and then you sent your daughter to my office in boots that were too big and that was the end of that." He looked at her. "Marry me, if you want to." Nora was quiet for a moment, looking at the harbor. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. "That," she said, "is the least romantic proposal I have ever heard." "I know. I'm going to say yes anyway." I was hopping. She married him in April in the small white church at the top of Harbor Street, with Ray standing up for Marcus and Fiona standing up for Nora, wearing boots that finally fit properly, because Marcus had noticed they were too large in November and had quietly gotten the right size in January and left them outside her door without a note, which Fiona had known immediately was from him, and had told no one because she understood, better than most adults, that some gifts were only meaningful if they stayed anonymous. The morning after the wedding, Marcus stood at the bakery window in the early light while Nora moved around her kitchen and Fiona sat at the back table doing her homework, her school bag hooked on the chair in the particular careless way of children who are entirely comfortable where they are. He stood there with his coffee and watched his family. The word arrived in his mind plainly, without ceremony, and settled there as if it had always been waiting, and felt the specific, terrifying, irreplaceable weight of having something real to lose again. That was the fear. It would always be the fear. He understood now that it did not go away. You did not reach a point where loving people stopped being frightening. You simply reached a point where the alternative, the harbor office, the tide charts, the deliberate and devastating loneliness, was no longer something you were willing to trade it for. Ray knocked on the bakery door at 7, same as he knocked on any door, which was to say without much preliminary, and accepted a piece of bread from Fiona with the dignity of a man receiving a great honor. "You look different," he said to Marcus. "I'm the same." "You're standing still," Ray said. "You've been moving for 6 years. You're standing still and you're not checking to see where the exits are." He bit into the bread. "It's different." Marcus looked out the window at the harbor. Gray water, white sky, the particular austere beauty of coastal Maine in the slow crawl toward spring. Boats rocking at their moorings. Everything where it was supposed to be. "Claire would have liked it here," he said. He had not said her name out loud to anyone except Nora in 6 years. It still cost him something. It always would. But the cost was different now. It was the price of remembering, which was not the same as the price of loss. The grief was real and the love behind it was real, and they were not separate things. They had never been separate things. He had just needed someone to stay close enough, long enough to show him that. Nora came and stood beside him at the window. She did not ask what he was thinking. She put her hand in his and they both looked at the harbor together. Fiona looked up from her homework. "Are you two being quiet and meaningful again?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Okay," she said, and went back to her homework. The bread was in the oven. The harbor was where he could see it. His daughter's name lived in his mouth again instead of buried in the place where he had put everything he was afraid to feel. His heart had turned to winter stone until she cried in his arms and melted it away. And what came through the melting was not the man he had been before grief. That man was gone, and rightly so. What came through was someone new. A man who had gone to the bottom of his own darkness and found, waiting there, the stubborn truth that love does not end when the beloved is gone. It continues, changed in form, searching for somewhere to go.